Wheels within wheels, plans within plans. This is Nikki G from Better Commander, and today we're talking about the Wheels archetype. In the beginning of time, the best card ever was set onto Earth by the gods of gaming. Wheel of Fortune. Do you get the sword, the skull, the cup, or the heart shape? It doesn't really matter, they all mean the same thing. Discard your hand and draw 7 cards, baby. But Nikki G, the Wheel of Fortune is $100 billion approximately. I can't afford that. Okay, well, settle down. There are other cards that do similar things but aren't as good, obviously. Today we'll talk about them and their various incarnations, colors of magic and what they offer, and commanders that can capitalize on a good old-fashioned wheel. First, why wheel? Well, we wheel well when we want wheels. Sometimes you have no cards and your opponents have meticulously sculpted hands. That's a good time to wheel. Let's all draw 7, right? Also, we are feeding our graveyard for reanimator shenanigans. Wheels in general are going to be very good for our game plan if we capitalize on them correctly. Well, I'll tell you right off the bat, green and white, though they can certainly draw cards and are great accessory colors, don't have any wheel effects to speak of. If I'm missing any, don't go all bazoo and seethe in a pit of hatred. Just leave a comment about it, alright? And while you're there, like and subscribe so I can buy cereal for my dog. White especially can capitalize off a good wheel with Smothering Tithe, so I have this in one of my decks. I'll go into it a little later. But if you have 3 opponents, you make 21 treasures, which seems really good. And green can be a great accessory color for ramping out our wheels as well. So for the purposes of this video, we'll be concentrating on red, blue, and black. There are several really great payoff cards in those colors like Narset Parter of Veils and Notion Thief. If you're a horrible monster, you can play cards like that. Alright, let's talk about a card that everyone loves to resolve. It's Wheel of Misfortune, 2 and a red for a sorcery. Each player secretly chooses a number 0 or greater. Then all players reveal those numbers simultaneously and determine the highest and lowest numbers revealed this way. Wheel of Misfortune deals damage equal to the highest number to each player who chose that number. Each player who didn't choose the lowest number discards their hand, then draws 7 cards. Got all that? So this is a very confusing card to resolve. Every time we play it, we have to reread it and make sure we're doing it correctly. But basically, you choose a number, and the player who chooses the lowest number doesn't wheel. The player who chooses the highest number wheels and it gets damage dealt to him equal to that number, and all the players in between basically just wheel. Wheel of Fate has Suspend 4 for 1 and a red. Each player discards their hand, then draws 7 cards. This card is really good if you can reliably cascade into it or cast it without paying its mana cost. It's not as good if you just want to cast it for its suspend cost because everybody at the table can see that coming and can remove your synergy pieces. Reforge the Soul is about as close as you're going to get to the original Wheel of Fortune, but it costs 1 red and 1 generic mana more. This is a fantastic wheel and is a very rare effect. So Reforge the Soul is 3 red for a sorcery. Each player discards their hand, then draws 7 cards, or you can pay it for its miracle cost, which is 1 and a red. You may cast this card for its miracle cost when you draw it if it's the first card you drew this turn. So if you can set up a top deck situation with this, it's as good, if not better, than Wheel of Fortune. That's a bold claim, I know it. Don't everybody go all crazy. So the Magus, this guy, is a really cool guy. He's like, hey man, you want to see this wheel? And it's like, yeah, I want to see the wheel. He's like, wait a second. You got to wait a turn and pay 2 more mana. Sorry, guy. So Magus of the Wheel is 2 and a red for a creature. Human Wizard, it's a 3/3. You pay 1 and a red, tap it, sacrifice it. Each player discards their hand, then draws 7 cards. So this has the advantages and disadvantages of being a creature. You can do it at instant speed if it sticks on the board for long enough, or if you can give him haste. Dragon Mage is an interesting one. He's a huge flying monster who studied at the Academy of the Wheel. I use this card in a surprising amount of decks. For me, it's a staple. Dragon Mage is 5 red for a creature, a dragon wizard flying. Whenever Dragon Mage deals combat damage to a player, each player discards their hand, then draws 7 cards. So in a deck where you have haste, or a deck like Scion of the Ur-Dragon where you can have this guy get transformed into at instant speed, you can refill your hand and fill your graveyard as well. Runehorn Hellkite is great in a deck where you can get it into the graveyard, but we are now entering into fringe playable territory. So if this is stuck in your hand, it's a generic flyer with some dragon synergy, but in most dragon decks, I'd rather have a better synergy piece. With Scion of the Ur-Dragon, you can tutor this guy into the yard, so there's that as well. So Runehorn Hellkite is 5 and a red for a creature, dragon, flying, 5 and a red, exile Runehorn Hellkite from your graveyard. Each player discards their hand, then draws 7 cards. I got kind of excited when Ruin Grinder was spoiled. It has that sweet wheel text, but in practice I'm not sure what deck this goes into that I wouldn't just rather have a Wheel of Misfortune. So Ruin Grinder is 5 and a red for an artifact creature construct. It's a 7/4. That is Menace. When Ruin Grinder dies, each player may discard their hand and draw 7 cards. This is pretty awesome in a deck where you have a commander who's an artifact sack outlet, like Osgir the Reconstructor. But even then, I mean, it's a lot of mana. So then we have another flavor of wheel in red, where we discard our hand to draw that many cards that we discarded. The first is Winds of Change. So Winds of Change is red for a sorcery. Each player shuffles the cards from their hand into their library and then draws that many cards. This is a 1-mana sorcery. It's extremely efficient for what it can do, but if you only have 1 card in hand, this is kind of a fumble. Very similar, but with their own unique text, are Incendiary Command and Molten Psyche. I love the art on Molten Psyche. This guy's brain is on fire, sadly. But that's what I want to make everybody do, set their brain on fire. So like and subscribe because you're a good person, and that's what champions do. Blue also has its own flavor of wheel, and it's disgusting. There are many effects that have all players shuffle their hand and graveyard into their library, then draw 7. We miss out on the discard portion to feed the graveyard, but this isn't a drawback in a lot of decks. So the prototype would be Time Twister and the OG Time Spiral. These cards are extremely expensive and are very good and will most likely never be reprinted as they're part of the reserve list. If you have a copy of these, I mean, that's fantastic. If you don't, at this point, it might not be worth it to buy some. However, talk to your play group. Maybe they like you, proxy them up. So there's a bunch of cards that do this that are not quite as efficient. We have Days Undoing, Echo of Eons, Game Plan, Diminishing Return, Time Reversal. These are great if your commander cares about other players drawing cards. Days Undoing especially is a really fantastic card. I use it most recently in a Dalico's deck. So each player shuffles his or her hand and graveyard into their library and then draws 7 cards. If it's your turn, end the turn. So you just have to make sure this is the last thing you're going to do on your turn. So in multicolored, if we add 1 white mana to this whole Jim Jam, we have Emergency Powers, which is a really cool card, though not on the power level of Time Twister. It's 5 and a white and a blue. Each player shuffles their hand and graveyard into their library, then draws 7 cards. Exile Emergency Powers. So if you cast this during your main phase, you may put a permanent card with converted mana cost 7 or less from your hand onto the battlefield. This is great if you're running a bunch of big old permanents. We also have a slightly different flavor in blue, a stinky binky, if you will, by the name of Windfall. So it's 2 and a blue for a sorcery. Each player discards their hand, then draws cards equal to the greatest number of cards a player discarded this way. So you're capitalizing on your opponent's big hands. Jace's Archivist does a reasonable impression and can do this repeatedly. So you add a little black mana to this, you have Whispering Madness. 2, a blue and a black for a sorcery. Each player discards their hand, then draws cards equal to the greatest number of cards a player discarded this way. So this also has Cipher. So you exile this spell as it resolves and code it onto a creature you control. Whenever that creature deals combat damage to a player, its controller may cast a copy of the encoded card without paying its mana cost. So this is a fantastic card in a deck where you have evasive attackers, a rogue deck, an ninjutsu deck, something like that, where you want to be wheeling and filling your graveyard as well. Now in black we have a card named Dark Deal. So this is pretty much it for black. Dark Deal is 2 and a black for a sorcery. Each player discards all the cards in their hand, then draws that many cards minus 1. Let's talk about a few unique artifacts. So Memory Jar is 5 for an artifact. Tap Sacrifice Memory Jar. Each player exiles all cards from their hand face down and draws 7 cards. At the beginning of the next end step, each player discards their hand and returns to their hand each card they exiled this way. So this can go in any deck and can be beautifully broken if you can recur it somehow. This is a reserve list banger from Urza's block. So there's also a Magus. Magus of the Jar is 3 blue for a creature, a human wizard, 3/3. So it has all the same text as Memory Jar. I'm not going to read all that over again. So this is really not as good because you have to untap with it unless you can give it haste somehow. And it can easily be removed from the battlefield. And everyone's favorite card, Teferi's Puzzle Box. So this is 4 for an artifact. At the beginning of each player's draw step, that player puts all the cards in their hand on the bottom of their library in any order, then draws that many cards. This is another confusing but cool artifact that can help with draw payoffs. So listen, there are probably more wheels, but I don't want to make a 10-hour video. So don't just sit there and scream into the void. Just comment one for gosh sakes if you think I missed one. So who are some commanders that want to wheel and deal, which is actually a card as well? Well, Nekazar comes to mind. So Nekazar the Mind Razor is 2 blue, black, and a red for a legendary creature, Zombie Wizard. It's a 2/4. At the beginning of each player's draw step, that player draws an additional card. Whenever an opponent draws a card, Nekazar the Mind Razor deals 1 damage to that player. So everybody hates Nekazar. He's been around forever. Everybody knows his deal. He has access to all the best wheels and also has access to all the other black punish effects like Megrim and Liliana's Caress. The problem is you draw your opponents into answers for Nekazar, so he needs a lot of protection. And next up we have Xyrus, the Writhing Storm, 2 green, blue, and a red for a legendary creature, a Snake Leviathan. It's a 3/5. It also has flying. Whenever an opponent draws a card, except the first one they draw on each of their draw steps, you create a 1/1 green snake creature token. Whenever Xyrus, the Writhing Storm, deals combat damage to a player, you and that player each draw that many cards. So this flying snake weirdo doesn't even have a face as far as I can tell. But 21 snakes and a sacrifice outlet or Perforos God of the Forge out and it's game over. So Ikoria was kind of a crazy set, and this was an amazing commander from the supplemental product, Commander 2020. So access to green gives us the best ramp and some really cool creatures to capitalize on Xyrus's wackiness. Bralin and Shabraz. I do have a Bralin and Shabraz deck, so I'm a little partial to these two whacks. So this is a crazy good pair of commanders from the same set. I have this deck. Access to white gives us some great removal and Smothering Tithe, as well as a couple ways to tutor out enchantments. So we can tutor out Smothering Tithe. We can grab Curiosity to kill the table at end step with Bralin. My play group knows this deck well, and many times I've killed myself with Bralin's Infinite Combo, not realizing there's a card like Underworld Dreams on the table or something like that. But Bralin is a legendary creature, human shaman for 3 and a red. So he partners with Shabraz. So whenever you discard a card, put a +1/+1 counter on Bralin, and it deals 1 damage to each opponent. So target shark gains trample until the end of turn. That's obviously for Shabraz. And Shabraz is 3, a white, and a blue for a legendary creature. He's a shark bird, right? So he has partnered with Bralin and flying. Whenever you draw a card, put a +1/+1 counter on Shabraz, the Sky Shark, and you gain 1 life. Target human gains flying until the end of turn. So these guys complement each other really well, though they're a little expensive. If you try to get them both out on the table, you kind of want to concentrate on one or the other to be your main commander. But the wheel effects feed into both's ability really well. All right, we're about to hop on the Izzet train. There's a lot of good Izzet commanders. I'll highlight a couple. Riel the Everwise is a pure value commander, a great wheel commander, and she can get really, really big. Staying on the Izzet train, we have Niv Mizzet Parun. So there's a couple incarnations of Niv Mizzet. Some are a little better than others. This guy's got a crazy casting cost, but it's probably the best of the bunch if you can manage that. So he can weaponize all kinds of wheels to kill the table. He only cares about you drawing cards. So you can afford to just run the wheels that draw you cards like Talarian Winds and other fringe stuff like that. The Locust God is 4 blue and a red for a legendary creature, a god. He has flying. Whenever you draw a card, create a 1/1 blue and red insect creature token with flying and haste. 2 a blue and a red, draw a card, then discard a card. When the Locust God dies, return it to its owner's hand at the beginning of the next end step. So this guy was reprinted in Commander 2020 and is a great include in any wheel deck or at the helm of his own deck. He's cheap right now, $2 or so. I'd pick one up. So he's a creepy bug. I hate bugs in general, but I like the fact that his tokens have haste and flying. If you can stick him in a cheaper wheel, then you have 21 flying power out of nowhere ready to swing. Do you have a good wheel commander that I didn't mention? Are there any wheel variations that you like to run in your decks? Let me know in the comments below. I hope you enjoyed this little video, and I love you all and all your pets and birds and whatever else you got floating around your house. So driving home today, I saw a squirrel with a full New York slice of pizza in its mouth, just running across the street. So just remember that the Wheel of Fortune spins for all of God's creatures. This is going to be Nicky G from Better Commander, signing off.